Richard updates his retirement spreadsheet once every quarter. The ritual is precise. Third Sunday, early morning, coffee poured before the rest of the house wakes up. Oak desk in the corner of the spare bedroom, laptop open. Brokerage tab on one side, spreadsheet on the other. Blue pen beside the keyboard. A yellow cell near the top of the page that tells him in one clean date when all of this will become enough. He built the file in 2011. He was 43 then. Old enough to feel time. Young enough to believe discipline could still outrun it. Since then, he has missed exactly 0 quarterly updates. The file in front of me contains 11 years of those revisions. Tax returns, brokerage statements, a pension summary from an employer he left in 2019, a Social Security estimate, 3 retirement projections generated by 3 different calculators, each of them calm, neat, and reassuring in its own slightly different way. Richard is 54 years old. He lives in a suburb outside Denver in a 3-bedroom house he and his wife bought 22 years ago. He drives a 2016 Toyota Camry with more than 100,000 miles on it. He is a purchasing manager for a regional building supply company. He is not reckless. He is not impulsive. He is not the kind of man who ignores numbers. He respects them. He trusts them.
He respects them. He trusts them. He believes they tell the truth if you look at them long enough. By the measures Richard uses, he is on track. Projected retirement age, 65. Projected portfolio at retirement, just over $1 million. Mortgage, paid off. Children, grown. Risk level, manageable. Outcome, secure. That is the story on paper. The purpose of this investigation is to determine why the paper and the future are no longer describing the same thing. Because the evidence suggests that Richard is not building a retirement plan. He is building a number. And those are not the same. Every case begins with an anomaly, a fact that does not fit the confidence surrounding it. Richard's anomaly is not a missing document. It is not a hidden debt. It is not a crisis in the account balances. His finances are orderly. The numbers are legible. The contributions are consistent. The file is almost aggressively respectable. The anomaly is that all of Richard's calculations produce reassurance, but none of them appear to test reality. His spreadsheet assumes a 7% annual return before retirement. Reasonable in isolation. It assumes his retirement spending will be about $54,000 a year, roughly his current household budget with the mortgage removed. Reasonable in isolation. It assumes $1 million is the landmark that converts decades of saving into safety. Reasonable in isolation. But retirement does not happen in isolation. Returns arrive in a sequence, not an average. Spending arrives in bursts, not tidy annual estimates. Inflation does not ask whether the number in Richard's spreadsheet feels large. And a retirement budget is not a moral document. It does not reward discipline. It only measures whether the future can be paid for when it arrives. Richard has mistaken a clean projection for a durable plan. That is the anomaly. Everything else in this case proceeds from it. The first exhibit is not dramatic. It is a worksheet. 11 line items. Housing, food, utilities, insurance, healthcare, transportation, travel, gifts, hobbies, subscriptions, miscellaneous. At the bottom, $54,000 a year. This figure survives every revision of Richard's file. The balances change, the date moves slightly, the projected returns get adjusted once or twice. The spending figure barely moves. Not because $54,000 is absurd, because $54,000 is a present-day number being asked to fund a future life.
Richard is not retiring this year. He is planning to retire in 11 years. At 3% annual inflation, $54,000 today becomes roughly $74,700 in 11 years. The same groceries, the same insurance pressure, the same ordinary life. Not richer, just later. And later costs more. Richard's spreadsheet does not treat the target as moving. It treats it as fixed. A portfolio of $1 million at a 4% withdrawal rate produces $40,000 a year. Against a retirement that actually costs $74,700 in the year Richard reaches it, that is a gap of $34,700 a year. Before his pension and Social Security narrow it, they narrow it. They do not close it. And there is a second layer. Richard plans to leave full-time work at 65. Full retirement age for Social Security, for someone his age, is 67. Waiting longer raises the benefit further. Either way, the portfolio has to carry more of the early weight than the spreadsheet emotionally admits. And in retirement, early weight is where fragility begins. This is the first exhibit. Not that Richard forgot inflation in the abstract, that he built an emotionally satisfying target in nominal dollars and mistook it for a standard of living. He is chasing a number that grows far slower than the life it is supposed to buy. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural defect. The second exhibit concerns timing, not how much Richard will have, when he will need it. Accumulation is forgiving. If you are still working, still contributing, a bad market year hurts, but doesn't force a decision. Retirement converts volatility into consequence. Here is the mechanism, at its simplest. Two retirees each begin with $1 million. Each plans to withdraw $50,000 in year one. Each will earn the same long-term average return. But one of them takes a 20% decline in year one. His portfolio falls from $1 million to $800,000. He still needs his $50,000. Groceries and insurance don't pause for bear markets. Now the account sits at $750,000. To climb back from $750,000 to $1 million, the portfolio doesn't need a 20% gain. It needs a gain of 33.3%. That is what loss plus withdrawal does. It shrinks the base and raises the burden at the same time. If the same 20% decline arrives 20 years later, after a decade of compounding has done its work, the damage is real but survivable. Late losses wound wealth. Early losses can wound the structure holding retirement together. Richard's spreadsheet uses averages, before retirement, after retirement. The file contains no evidence he has ever tested what happens if the first 5 or 10 years of retirement are simply weak, not catastrophic. Flat years, a couple of declines, recovery's too small to matter because withdrawals continue underneath them the whole time. A retirement can survive a disappointing long-term average if the early years are kind. A retirement can fail under a perfectly acceptable long-term average if the early years are not. Richard is not just planning to retire at 65. He is planning to do it on a target so narrow, the portfolio will need to cooperate immediately. That is what makes this exhibit dangerous. Not that markets are unpredictable, but that his plan leaves no room for the order in which they misbehave. The third exhibit is behavioral. It begins with an assumption that appears in retirement plans everywhere, that retirement turns a person into a cheaper version of himself. Richard's file assumes this, not in a sentence, but in the shape of the budget. The mortgage disappears, so housing drops. The commute disappears, so transportation drops. Work clothes disappear, so discretionary spending softens. By the logic of the spreadsheet, retirement is a subtraction problem. That is not how identity works.
Richard has spent 30 years revealing
repeatedly, what he does when someone he loves has a need. He pays for it. Not recklessly, reliably. In 2014, when his mother needed a refrigerator, Richard bought it before she asked twice. In 2019, when his son tried to keep wedding costs modest, Richard covered more than he'd planned. Last year, when his daughter and her husband were short on a down payment, he wrote a check for $18,000. The check is not the issue. The check is the evidence.
Richard's budget assumes retirement will make him more selective with money at precisely the stage of life when family requests, home repairs, and health needs tend to become more visible, not less. It also treats irregular expenses as optional because they're irregular. A roof is irregular, so is a furnace. So is helping a child through a hard year. These aren't monthly line items. They're life expenses. And a budget built only from monthly categories tends to erase them because they don't arrive politely enough to fit the template.
This is the drift. Not lifestyle inflation in the classic sense, identity drift between the person being budgeted for and the person who will actually show up. A more honest version of Richard's life, in today's dollars, is probably closer to $68,000, not $54,000. Not because he is wasteful, because he is himself. At 3% inflation over 11 years, that becomes roughly $94,100 by the time he reaches 65. Against a $40,000 withdrawal from a $1 million portfolio, that is not a plan. It is a mismatch no amount of organization can close. Richard did not underestimate what things cost. He underestimated who would be spending the money.
It would be easy, at this point, to treat Richard as an exception. He isn't. His pattern is common because the tools he used are common. Most retirement calculators ask for a small set of inputs: current age, retirement age, current savings, monthly contribution, expected return, and return one large, calming number. Inflation is sometimes included quietly in the background. Sequence risk almost never is. Irregular family expenses, healthcare shocks, and the simple fact that most people don't want to become stripped-down versions of themselves in retirement, none of it fits the form. The calculator produces a figure. The figure produces relief. And relief is easily mistaken for accuracy. This is how a planning culture becomes a number culture. Milestones feel measurable in a way that lives don't. 1 million, 1.5, 2 million. A number is easy to compare against a balance sheet. It is harder to compare against a life. So the number wins. It wins in headlines, in online tools, in the private language people use to reassure themselves they're being serious about the future. What it doesn't always win is retirement itself, which doesn't ask how disciplined the saver was. It asks whether the assets, the timing, and the actual spending can survive the next 30 years. Richard is not unusual because he trusted the visible math. He is usual. He represents a large class of financially responsible people who did exactly what they were told: contribute regularly, avoid obvious mistakes, watch the number grow, and assumed a clean, round figure would eventually become a wall between them and anxiety. The wall is often thinner than it looks. The finding of this investigation is straightforward. Richard does not have a discipline problem. He has a measurement problem. For 11 years, he has measured progress toward a number too detached from the life it was meant to support. Nominal dollars against real future costs. An average return against a sequence he'll actually have to live through. A reduced version of himself against 30 years of documented evidence to the contrary. And because the spreadsheet kept updating cleanly, the plan felt more valid every year it survived unchanged. This is one of the quieter dangers in personal finance. Bad habits usually announce themselves.
Good habits can hide bad assumptions for a very long time. Richard saved. Richard contributed. Richard avoided obvious self-destruction. That is exactly why this case matters. He did almost everything the culture of retirement planning tells a prudent man to do, and he still ended up with a target that may fail him. Can it be fixed? Yes. Not by polishing the old number, but by replacing it. If Richard's realistic spending need lands somewhere between $75,000 and $95,000 a year by the time he retires, depending on timing and inflation, the required asset base changes with it, and so does the structure around it. A later retirement date helps. A higher savings rate helps. A cash reserve built specifically to cover the first 2 or 3 retirement years helps, because it removes the need to sell depreciated assets into a bad opening stretch. A more flexible withdrawal approach helps. And delaying Social Security from full retirement age to 70 raises his monthly benefit to roughly 124% of the full amount, a permanent increase no market decline can take back. But the numbers matter less than the correction underneath them. Richard's real question was never, how much do I need to retire? It is, how much do I need in future dollars under an unfavorable opening sequence to support the life I am actually likely to live? That question is longer. It is less satisfying. It is the first honest one in the file. This case is not closed. Richard is still 54. Next quarter, unless something interrupts the pattern, he will sit at the same oak desk with the same blue pen and the same yellow cell waiting for its update. He will enter a new balance. He will watch the date move a little closer. He will feel what careful people often feel when the numbers look orderly: relief. Not because he is safe, because order resembles safety from a distance. That is the final distinction in this file. Richard is not getting safer merely because the spreadsheet is becoming more precise. He is becoming more precise about an assumption he hasn't properly tested. If he opens the file now, not the spreadsheet, the file, there is still time. Time to measure in future dollars. Time to test a weak opening stretch. Time to budget for who he actually is, not who the template assumes he'll become. Time to stop confusing a round number with a resilient plan. The revised number may feel unfriendly. It may feel like punishment for 11 years of doing the right things. It is neither. It is the first number in this case that is trying to tell the truth. And an honest number, even a larger one, is more merciful than a comforting one that arrives too late. Somewhere in this audience is another Richard. Not in Denver, not 54, not necessarily named Richard at all, but sitting in front of a projection that feels clean enough to trust, a balance mistaken for a future, a calculator result mistaken for a defense, a number mistaken for a life. If that is you, this file does not accuse you of failure. It invites inspection. Open it before retirement does it for you. The next file concerns a man who retired on schedule, with a number that looked sufficient, and discovered that the first years of retirement can do damage no spreadsheet knows how to fear. His case is already waiting. Case remains open.